Okay, you're recorded.
Hi. Okay, we're getting started a little late, but we'll go ahead and get started. Call this meeting to order, and we're going to start with Mr. Wilbur talking about our monthly budget actuals report.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I made a copy of their draft budget to action report for 2019 through, or as of today, with expenses through September 30th. It's a draft report because we still have to make some minor adjustments, but I think it's 95% on track. In summary, similar to the one we've done in the past, the best way to look at it is the amount of money that we've spent and the amount of money that we've spent to include encumbrances. So the amount of money that we have spent in general government, while we're about 75% through the year, is a little more than 72%, sort of the gray column percent budget spent, 72.2%. So as far as spending, that's where we are, but we also know that departments have actually made encumbrances for payments they know they're going to make. When we include that, we are at about 76% spent. A couple of highlights I just want to point out here, and some of this is repetitive, but you'll notice that in the CFO's office, it's at 58%. It's because the CFO has that significant amount of money in his budget to help us manage the transactions of ML&P. So that money is not being spent. You'll notice that Chris Schutte, Economic and Community Development, it's at 92%. It's mostly because of the encumbrances for contracts to SMG and the payments that we make there. So that's why that one's high. Looking at the fire department, while their percent spent is pretty much right on target, they're running a little hot. Their total amount is 70. It's not quite a percent over, but we are aware of that. We've talked about that in the past. The other one would probably be maintenance and operations. They are at 84%. A lot of that has to do with contracts in their world. The mayor's office, that is due to the grants that they've already paid out. So they're at 78% total, but that has to do with grants. In Mr. Falsey's world, and the municipal manager, that 92%, the expenditures for what we do in workman's comp and general liability and our insurance is all accounted for in there. And then I think the other two that I want to highlight is the police department. On their labor side, they're a little under budget, but overall they're a little over. And I think some of that has to do with the contracts, and they're still kind of catching up. When we made the appropriation for the settlement for the Henry case, we added that back in. And I think primarily, for Public Works Administration, they show at 82% spent, and that is because the expenditures for the limited road service areas are all in that account. So that's why that one shows them being running hot. And then in Robin's world in real estate, they're at almost 93%. It's because of the lease payments that she makes in the calendar year. So they've got those encumbered. But again, as you are aware, the fire department, we're working diligently to make sure that they can sort of help dampen down what we project them to end up at the end of the year. So that's what's going on the. And this is all of general government. This is not just the 5 majors, so this includes everything as the service areas, workman's comp, general liability. We'll have the September monthly report to you, I think not at the September 22nd meeting, but your first meeting in November. We will also should have for you the third quarter report for budget to actuals, including the utilities, for your meeting at November 5th. The month-end close for September is just now getting complete. We have to get the utilities caught up to get that included. So that's what's going on with 19. And before you have any questions, or before I go to 20, that'll be short.
I also, I would say I was just waiting for Mr. Dyson, but I just forgot to do introductions. So did you want to start, Fred?
Start what?
Fred Dyson, he's here.
Oh, Fred Dyson.
Alex Lipka, CFO. Lance Wilbur.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Suzanne LaFrance. Eddie Valentin.
Pete Peterson.
Crystal Kennedy.
Don Weddleton.
You guys want to chime in too? There aren't many of you.
Mike Chadwick, Internal Audit.
All Rice, Treasury.
Dan Wallington.
is back there too. Suzanne, you had a question?
Oh, thank you. Yes, so we've talked some about the overtime situation with the fire department. That is not working. In terms of my constituents hate it, and we need a different approach because I just can't support that, and that's what I'm telling folks. I mean, either we have apparatuses and we keep them in service, or we don't. And so every time one is out of service, it's deeply unsettling. And so I would like to know, how are we going to fix this? Because this is not a policy that, or practice, I support.
And can I ask, we've had a meeting scheduled for October 30th from 12 to 2 to cover 3 different topics, one of them being this issue, I believe. Is that true?
I don't know. I don't know what's totally on the
Desiree?
agenda.
It is, the agenda is not published yet, because the chair is waiting to hear back from the administration's things before I get it out there.
Okay.
Yep.
But we are planning to do that.
Right.
Go ahead and answer anyway.
And I'm fine with waiting, but I think it's very important, you know, to make that statement that it is not supported and people are confused and about why we're even doing that. It should not reflect our priorities. So many of us are eager to get that resolved.
I think it'd be great just to hear a short, whether it's from you or Mr. Falsey, a short update on what's going on, because we are hearing from people. So rather than waiting for 2 more weeks to get the scoop, if you could give us the scoop now, that would be great. Brief version.
As far as the choice to manage with the money that they have and the services they have, the closing them down. If they have another option rather than closing or doing a rotation, I think we would be, and OMB would be up to that. Our task to them was figure out what you can do to trim your expenses, and if they have a different solution for some other non-labor expense that they don't want to incur, we wouldn't. We look to the department to figure out what are the options that they have, and those are the options they proposed.
And I would just add, Madam Chair, that I feel like I didn't know about this. I realize this is something that has run this way. This has been the run rate for previous years, but it seems like it just kind of popped up that, oh, okay, $4 million gap. This would probably have been better had we dealt with it quarterly. And you may have conveyed that, you probably did to us, but I know it does seem like we're in this situation approaching fourth quarter. It seems a little late.
I think we have, I'll start and then Mr. Falsey can jump in. We knew that the fire department had some challenges probably around August or maybe even earlier than that. But we, at that point, the ability to close apparatus during probably one of the warmest summers that we've had didn't make a lot of sense at that time. But so other things that they were looking at, whether it was when they brought the academy on, that would reduce their overtime, the benefit they thought that they would see that didn't come to fruition as they had projected, and so we were giving them every opportunity, and then we got to the point where we have to start shutting things down or come up with some other choice, some other procurement that they're not going to occur. The fire department and the other 27 departments, we approve a budget for them. They are expected to manage the money that they have in that amount of year. There are many departments that don't get all the money that they want. That still means the directive they have is to manage with what they have. And so in the Office of Management Budget, that is the task we give to them. And if they can't do that or we have to make some other choices, then we bring those up. But our task here is to make sure that they can manage what they have. And sometimes they have a difficulty doing it. And some things are out of their control, but many things are.
Thank you, Mr. Woodman.
Yep.
Did you want to add anything, Mr. Falsey?
I guess just a high level gloss, which is to say, Lance Wilbur is correct, that we passed the budget is a fixed amount of money. We talked about in this work session now a month ago, I guess it was, when the fire department has an unexpected expense, they have very few tools in which to put the brakes on spending money. We have stretched that farther than we are authorized to do by the Assembly. We have allowed them to go significantly over budget because we knew that we had higher revenues from other places that we could make up the difference. We thought we had some savings in other departments that we could make up the difference, and that we were going to beg forgiveness, which is sort of the usual practice at the end of the year to say some made it, some didn't, beg for forgiveness. But we reached the limit because we just are out of money to cover that overage. So the consequence is that we are not leaving the community exposed. We are still going to get the job done in the same geographic area that the fire service normally covers, but in a thinner coverage model. And that's not highly satisfactory to us either. We don't like offering that level of service. We like offering the full level of service. So we are committed to trying to figure it out for next year. And part of figuring it out for next year is to, for the first time, take the fire academy out of the one-time ads part of the budget and make it part of the continuation budget, so that everybody knows we're going to have to actually have a fire academy every year just to keep the fire department at the same level of staff. That had fallen out at least in the Sullivan area. And we have been sort of adding fire academies as a one-time expense every year. Part of the difficulty of that process has been that sometimes the fire academies have come too late in the year to match the people power to the need. Now we should be able to launch the fire academy predictably very early January, so that when we get into the heavy lead season, we'll be more covered. In the meantime, we are starting to study the relationship between the personnel numbers and the overtime needs, so that we can, at some point, declare that we have a pretty solid recommendation that this is the optimum ratio. There's going to be some amount of overtime, which is inevitable, but there is a balance in which you could say, rather than paying overtime, I'll have more bodies, and the more bodies would be better. I guess that's the best thing I can offer you now, and if the special meeting of this group is to address this and two other topics, we will be happy to provide more detail.
Thank you. Ms. Salvatell?
Thank you. So I have shared the same concerns as Ms. LaFrance, and I'm having a hard time with this because fire here shows 70, I went in the wrong line, but 75, 73%. So that seems to be a disconnect. I realize this was September, but that's because we know they're otherwise in.
Yeah, there's two,
Okay.
it's an excellent observation. This is a budget to actuals that they've actually spent. The overage is a projection that we anticipate they're going to have. It's not reflected in the actuals here, which is what they've actually either already spent or what they've set aside actually for a contractual or something they spent. We've asked departments to give us their projections for the not just the fire department, everybody. And if they also have any adjustments potentially in their revenues, we've asked all of them to give us that. So that's going to help us when we get to the year end. But for the fire department, the projection is they are going to be over by some amount. We're doing everything we can to make that number as small as possible.
And if I may ask a follow-up, Madam Chair?
Sure.
So what is the role of the Office of Management and Budget? We know there's been consistent budget shortfalls in the department. I mean, it seems like if this has consistently been an issue,
Oh, yeah.
how do we start? I mean, one is we operationalize some costs is what I'm hearing, but that's still going to potentially provide a giant shortfall again next year.
I guess the first thing that we look at is we don't automatically give them money. What we do is we want to find out why is it that they're over? What are the management practices they are undertaking that's causing them to overspend? If there are management choices or things that we need to do operationally different, and making sure that we're pulling all of the management levers and all of the choices that we might otherwise be available, we make sure that we can do that. And if we can do all of that, and they are still don't have the ability to provide the service they want, or the service that we expect, then we do adjust. And that's, I think, what Mr. Falsey was mentioning, particularly as it relates to the academies. So,
And I think Mr. Falsey wanted to add something. So.
Yeah, and I wanted to look back to a question from Senator LaFrance and to pick up this new thread from Senator Zalatel. I'll be more candid than Lance. I think that the fire department's story is not being well told by this document, because this document is, as Lance said, saying here are budget to actuals in real time. We know that at the end of the year there is this extraordinary leave cash out cost, which is not reflected in this now. So this should be a better reporting tool. When the new finance director for the fire department came on board, Dave Swarner, 2 years ago, he recognized this too and realized he couldn't manage his budget without having some kind of accrual month to month so he can anticipate that there's this big expense that happens at the end of the year. That hasn't internally on our side of the ledger turned into a formal encumbrance, so it's not showing up here. We should figure out how to do better than that, because we know it's going to happen and we have been paying attention to it, but this document would not have given you earlier notice of that known but difficult to predict end of the year costs. So I put that in the category of stuff that we are.
I would also add that in particular as it relates to labor and cost of labor in the fire department, a significant jump and a significant amount of money is the leave cash out at the end of the year. They're required to do that by contract. The amount of leave cash out, we don't know until they actually do it. What we can do is we can look at the fire department and basically say that, Mr. Weddleton or Ms. Kennedy or Mr. Peterson and so on, they have so many hours on the books, they're going to have to cash out so many hours, but we also have to look at the accrual and all that. So it is a projection. We do know that if they have a lot on the books, we do know that they will have to cash out. So it is a projection until it's actually done. But we would show an encumbrance in here. We could show that as an estimation, but the number will change drastically in hundreds of thousands of dollars for the fire department, depending on how much leave they've taken and how much leave they have to cash.
Seems
and then,
like there
then
must
you ask,
be-
why does it change drastically? It's because they might be taking leave rather than cashing the leave in. Obviously, the closer we get to the end of the year, the more refined that number gets until they actually do it.
Seems like there must be some average, though, that you could somewhat rely on, or does it
Yeah,
vary
I mean-
that much per year?
No, we budget right now, I think we budget, it's $4 million. I'll look at the number. We budget $4 million just for leave cash out, just for the fire department.
Yeah,
And
and I'll say,
Yeah.
we are trying to get more sophisticated about this. So Dave Swarner has built a model where he is projecting the amount of leave cash out that is based on the number of people who have reached the leave cash out cap. So without getting all the way into the
Yeah.
weeds, it should be modelable. There will be error
Yeah.
bounds on it, but we can do better than not putting it in,
Yeah.
in numbers at all.
Great, thanks. Mr. Weddleton, did you raise your hand, or were you just?
I did have comment, but Crystal had one more interesting.
Oh,
Or-
I didn't know that.
You want me to, I guess the question is,
Suzanne, you wanted to-
how flexible would the fire department be between putting money into salaries and that versus the money that they might have in capital? In other words, if there are contracts, or if they're planning on buying a certain amount of equipment, and they decide, well, maybe we can't afford that, we need to put that into salaries in order to keep people staffed at our fire stations, can they do that?
They can move money from non-labor to labor, and if that is a choice that they want to make to save money, that just requires our involvement at OMB. If they want to move it inside non-labor, they can do that. But if they want to go from one to the other, almost always, if any department wants to take money out of their labor budget and put it into their non-labor, they need our approval. We're going to want to know, one, if we do it, will they be able to pay their labor expenses? And two, are they going to end in a positive situation? So,
Well, I'm saying the opposite, can they go from non-labor to labor?
yes, they can.
Okay, all right.
Well, we'll just jump in, sorry. So there is a piece of equipment that was on a bond.
Operating and capital, you can't mix those two. You can't move the bond money. I mean, inside their operating budget, if they have dollars to buy, I don't know, a saw or something like that they needed on the equipment, they could not do that and then transfer their non-labor budget to their labor budget to maintain that. They could do that.
Okay, I think Suzanne had, or Mr. France, but then we should probably move on because we got a lot of other stuff
I
going
have
on.
a quick clarification on the encumbrances column. That includes materials plus labor, but not leave cash out? Or does it just include,
I will verify with the fire department if it includes.
Just for all of them, encumbrances in general in this report?
I think actually, the only departments that have a significant amount of leave cash out that would encumber it would probably be the fire department. There may be one or two others,
But I'll say, in the main, I think the encumbrances have showed up for contractual kind of relationships.
That's
where
exactly
we have
right.
said, we have let a contract where I can pay this rate up to $1 million. I've encumbered the $1 million now, and then I'll actually pay whatever I pay her. So I don't think things like leave cash out where we contract with anybody are showing up as encumbrances. There might be a way that we can do it as like a pre-encumbrance. You gotta figure something out. But
I guess my question is labor in there, encumbrances,
Mhm.
labor is, okay.
And when
Thanks.
you're fixing this sheet, could you repeat this list of departments over here so that we can more easily compare it to the encumbrance amounts?
Put it
Okay.
on a long piece of paper.
As long as
Yeah,
the
it's like the
numbers don't get
easiest ask
smaller.
easy earlier. Oh, yeah. Well, we could always do an 11 by 14 and have the names on both sides and make the numbers bigger. We can have everything we want.
Tara, you follow.
Is everyone ready to move on to item B? We okay to do that and have Alex give us our MOA financial status report?
And for that, I'm going to ask Treasurer Dan Moore to see if there's any revenue update.
Sure. I'll make this real quick because I'm running around a little bit. So the revenue, you did receive the formal, my name is Dan Moore from Treasury. The revenue report, the formal one, the real detailed one you received very recently at the December meeting. So that has all the details, but just to give you an update, this is, about 2-3 weeks later. And it's marked up here because our revenue analyst is on leave, and I have a PDF version of what he updated, so I have it marked up. It actually shows you kind of how much can happen in a week. But these are the two areas, the two changes I'll highlight are the ones that we were waiting to hear on, and they can't have the most movement. So one of them was, and just overall, for general government, the current projected revenue variance for this year is a positive $1.4 million. All right, so that's the updated number. It used to be 2.4 million, so it's down about $1 million. There's two reasons. One is personal property tax for the late and involuntary rolls. Those were just generated a week ago, and so we now have a good number. That is the final piece of property tax that we did not know. So that was down about $300,000 from what was projected, and that's a very, very reasonable variance for those rolls. Overall, property tax is still positive for the year. It's still $1.7 million positive. The other one is investment earnings, and we talk about this every time we update you. That really can swing a lot from month to month. And we've had very strong positive month, and then opposite way, and it's been doing that for 4 months in a row now. So since last month, the most current update received just as of yesterday is about a $700,000 or so swing in the negative direction. When you compare it to the overall budget, investment earnings is actually very, very close to the budget. It's only $200,000 off. So it's very, very close. The only other one I'll mention, you already know room tax is very strong this year. The only other one that we're really waiting on is the PFD. The garnishments went out or were applied in the first week of October, and we received about $2.6 million from those. That's for any outstanding delinquent criminal fine or fee. Normally, about 90% of the garnishment is given to us in that first week of October. But this year, you may have heard from your financial institutions that if you apply by paper check, you won't actually receive the money until the third week of the month of October. And so we don't have as much of an indication of a large sample with that first batch that we normally would. So we're crossing our fingers that we'll still break about $4 million for the year, but until the third week of October, we actually won't know. So those are the big areas that have fluctuation, but it's getting real close to very little left in the year that will fluctuate, except for investment earnings.
So Mr. Dyson has a question, then Mr. Peterson.
Okay.
Yeah, so my life's very interesting because we have many varieties of friends. One of was a career criminal. When he got his check, 2 other states had already garnished. Is there any way for us to get to the top of the list when it comes to garnish?
It's all driven by state statute. So the state, Alaska, federal government, child support, student loans, those all come ahead of us statutorily. We're about number 7 on the list.
Yeah, but top of other states.
In other states, if it's a judgment that was filed ahead of our judgment, then they're gonna come ahead of us. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Peterson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and it's counterintuitive to me how the room tax can be up by $840,000, but that the vehicle rental tax is actually down.
Right,
Do you have an
yeah.
idea on that?
Yeah, they do track, in terms of projected growth, they're very similar, so it's about 3 or 4% per year is the growth. With rental vehicle tax, it's a smaller, more concentrated market by far, and their pricing and the competition really varies a lot year to year. For room tax, it's actually been very steady and predictable up until this year, and I think with all the cruise ships coming into town, and I guess there was opportunity in raising rates. The industry, especially the larger hotels, really raised the rates this year. I don't expect them to repeat that next year. And our analyst, who's on leave right now, he's actually looked at how it goes from one stronger to another. So I just say they are similar in terms of growth in tourism, but the pricing is very, very different, and that would explain it. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it for
That's
you,
it.
Alex? Okay. Let's move on to getting a report from Nolan from BAC.
Thank you. Nolan Cloud, I chair the Budget Advisory Commission. I have a couple of updates. I did note that the ordinance that we moved forward on the spending cap and the tax cap and the blending of those into something a little more cohesive. I saw that was acted upon. You guys, the Assembly acted on that in the October 8th meeting. So hopefully we were helpful in that process, and we certainly thank the Assembly for devoting attention and consideration to that and for passing that ordinance.
I think it passed unanimously, right?
Very good, but
So-
thanks for bringing it.
Thank you. We are in full blown mode for the 2020 budget as you expect, as I know that you are as well. So our last meeting, our October 3rd meeting, we voted to a budget overview from Lance and OMB on the big picture items. We are doing a work session next week on the budget, as well as addressing it in our November regular meeting, which is November 7th, I believe. So we're going to be devoting a lot of attention to that. We are dividing up the budget and among our members to review in depth. Some initial impressions that at least that I had. One is that it's interesting that in real terms the overall budget is actually shrunk by about 2% from last year. When you look at inflation, I think that it's like a $2.1 million increase, and that's actually much less than the rate of inflation. So it's I don't know if that's always mentioned in public, but that the budget actually declining in real terms is definitely an interesting thing. Also, the Parks and Recreation positions.
Excuse me, thank you. How much should CPI or change, what's the delta between ours and country?
Sure. So through the chair, off the top of my head, I believe that Anchorage's CPI is actually a little bit higher than the national average, about 3 or so percent. And
3%?
I believe it's
4.3.
3%.
Wow.
I believe is the correct number.
Okay.
That's I'm doing this off memory, and then I think the actual budget increase is like 0.3%.
Okay, but ours tracks with the national one, with a 3% delta?
It varies a little bit from the national rate, but Anchorage has been trending a little bit higher.
Okay, thank you. The growth.
The growth of it, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So I did think that was worth noteworthy. Also, we were at least I was really happy to see the position increases in Parks and Recreation to deal with homelessness and abatement and related issues. Otherwise, we have one new member, Caitlin Hedberg, who's right now she's the director of philanthropy for the Nature Conservancy. So she's just starting with us. We have one other open position on the commission as well. The ask then that what I would bring to the Assembly now is that as we do our homework and divide up and dig into the 2020 budget, I would ask this group what items of it are flagged for interest that maybe deserve special attention. If there's anything that this group would suggest.
Did you get a copy of the memo that Felix put together with input from all of us?
Yeah. Actually, I don't believe I've seen that yet. No.
Do you have it?
I sent it to him.
So, and I don't know what version you have, but there's also a version that Felix passed out. So Felix, with all of our input through some goals and visioning that we've done over the past few months, put together a list of things that the Assembly values and wants to see in the budget. And then he and I think Suzanne, you both met with the administration to talk through those things, right? And many of them were not included. And so Felix passed out, I think last week, a copy of that memo with, whether it was included or not.
Okay.
So I think it'd be interesting for you guys to see that and see what you think about those things. So if his version doesn't have included or not included, ask Felix for it.
Yes,
He only
yeah.
gave me a printed copy, so I don't have a digital copy.
Thank you very much for that, Madam Chair.
Suzanne might have it, I don't know. But
Probably best coming from Felix,
Okay.
since he's done some additional work on that.
Yeah.
But we'll make sure we get that to you.
yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for being here. And I don't have a specific item for the 2020 budget per se. And remind me, Are you all looking into other revenue ideas? We had a work session as a group where we looked at 4 different possibilities, and I would love to get your group's feedback on sales taxes, payroll taxes, I mean, anything like for this community, and if you have other ideas or recommendations for how to proceed.
Through the chair, Ms. France, the work session you're talking about, was it October 4th? Was that the one that budget?
It was a
So-
rules committee.
Yeah.
Jed Smith was here.
So yes, I
but
was
sort
yes,
of
I was just gonna
incidentally.
say, I
Yeah.
wasn't at the meeting, but
Right.
Jed Smith from our commission was, and actually talked to him about it a little bit afterwards. And he mentioned that, and so new revenue sources is something that's a very top of our agenda as far as interests go. The stormwater utility being one of those, and I did catch the discussion at the prior meeting, and some of the issues around what the rate structure is, what some options for the rate structure is, what the public involvement looks like, are things that are things that we're interested in too, and that we can help to address. But other revenue sources are also something that we want to be able to focus on.
Thanks.
And especially after the 2020 budget session, the season is through, we're going to be looking at that, or looking at areas.
Some of those things, of course, are things that could potentially go on the ballot in April, and the timeline for doing that is in January. So just keep that in mind if you have feedback. Probably waiting for several months means you'd catch the next round.
Oh, right. Clock is ticking, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the body will do, but that's just something to keep in mind in terms of timing. Anybody else have any questions for Nolan? Okay, we really appreciate what you're doing. Forrest and I are going to start attending the meetings. I think the chair typically chairs this committee, and so
Right.
he had been coming, but maybe hasn't, and we're going to start alternating.
Okay,
So
November
neither of us,
7th?
yeah, I'll be there in November.
Very good.
Forrest will be there in December. Neither of us can make the special meeting on the 24th because we have a rules committee meeting. But
Thank you very much.
yeah, thank you, Nolan.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I just thought of one other thing.
Can you just say your name for the record?
Yeah, I will for the record. So my name is Dan Morgan from Treasury. On the room tax and the question that was asked, it reminded me as I sat down that there is a really good bit of news that came about very recently. The Assembly passed an ordinance in mid-August around that time to require online hosting platforms to register with us. And we already had Airbnb as a voluntary agreement, but now it's mandatory. The next big one in line would be like VRBO and HomeAway, and which is actually part of the Expedia. There's a whole family of companies that all fall under the Expedia umbrella. So we just received notice from them, I think within the last week or so, that we have their agreement. So they're going to register with us. They're going to collect tax as early as November. So it's going to come in place really fast. They even gave us an estimate on the amount of revenues, and it's several times greater than we had in the summary of economic effects. I can't quote the revenues because that's actually confidential, but it's very positive. So I wanted to let you all know about that. Also, the comment made about the Rules Committee and different revenue ideas, we're available for any information you may need on that. And even if the Budget Advisory Commission does get involved, I know on the room tax, we already have an ordinance drafted with our backup information to support going from 12% to 14%, if that's something the body wants to do. So anyway, I just wanted to share that while it was current, because I thought it was very good news. And thanks for approving that ordinance.
Okay. Mr. Falsey? Senator Farley? We haven't used that one in a while.
I don't think there's much of a formal update. I should tell you that last time we met, I said it was one big systemic pay error in SAP, request for change. We're hoping to go into production on September 24th to fix one big systemic underpayment. We tried to get that in on September 24th, and it did not work. So it is, I think, not yet done. But for that one, I think we are close to the place where the machine has made as many corrections back to the beginning of time as it can be reasonably expected to make. And so we're on the cusp now of really turning the corner and saying, okay, the machine is now paying correctly going forward. Now it is time to clean up all the mess officially. And that starts with, we are hiring 3 payroll auditors to go back to September 11th, 2017 and pick up every single person who has ever worked for us since then, it's about 4,000 individuals, and run a scrub of what they should have been paid and what we actually paid them so that we can say definitively, everybody got paid correctly. The gonna start with MLP because we want to have that cleaned up before MLP's departure to Juliet, assuming that does happen first quarter or early next year. And then we'll be rolling across everybody. But we've been sort of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I think that we are taking the next step in that direction, and you'll see in the budget submission that those 3 positions show up. We hire them as these payroll auditors. We would keep them around for as long as we need them, and then the notion would be through attrition, we would shrink the department back to its original size when that function is no longer necessary.
Mr. Kepler has a question.
Thank you.
For the record, that applause is coming from Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, I unfortunately think that applause might be a little bit optimistic. So, the
Applause rejected
My
by
applause
Mr.
is not
Dunn.
out.
so
It's inanimate.
Mr. Falsey, about how many payroll corrections are we continuing to get on a month-to-month basis? And if we are at what we think is a steady state, can you very briefly describe, if it is higher, why it might be higher than the PeopleSoft state we were in before launch?
I don't have the most current numbers because that was in the category of things I was getting all of those charts, and I said, stop making me charts to keep fixing the problem. The last data I saw showed that we were getting about 100 a month, which is higher than it was in the old PeopleSoft world where it was more 50 a month. Partly that's because there are some systemic defects that are affecting a number of people that are happening every time, and we fix those. If the number remains higher even after those last few systemic defects are corrected, I guess I will owe you a better answer, and I don't have one for you right now. I know that changing schedules is inherently more difficult in SAP, and unavoidably so, than it was in our old timekeeping system. In the old timekeeping system, managers or employees could move an hour. Now the schedule is hardwired into the system, and you have to hit the time card and to punch into a time clock and hit that schedule. If you worked a different schedule, there's more of a process of having your manager call central payroll, load a different schedule, and then the punches hopefully match that new schedule. That process is inherently more cumbersome than the system we used to have, and that might mean that we live with a permanent number of more pay corrections than we used to have, but I don't know, and I'm sort of speculating wildly now because I haven't fully investigated that question.
Forrest has a follow-up, and then Mr. Peterson.
A follow-up, although I think it's a rather large topic that we probably need to discuss and sort of delicately in the months going forward. But Mr. Peterson and I have been at many of our community councils, or all of them, describing the $4 million overage in the fire department and how that's tied to SAP. And at least 2 of the community councils, we've gotten the question, okay, are we going to sue SAP? And it's not just about that, it's about the whole suite of problems we've encountered and the millions upon millions of, damages essentially. Can you describe in any kind of, detail in this forum if we are seriously considering any kind of legal action against SAP and what that might look like?
This is one I think I would happily say, I'm not the municipal attorney anymore, so I would refer you to the municipal attorney. It might be one that we should have a big executive session discussion about.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Is someone noting that? Desiree? Okay, great. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I'm sure this is something you don't want to hear, but I ran into a union individual, and he recognized me and immediately wanted to talk about what a nightmare SAP was, and that many of his co-workers had given up filing or telling people that they didn't get paid the correct amount. And so there is a huge amount of frustration out there. I know you know that there already is that. There's probably even more frustration out there that you're not aware of. And so I know it's only anecdotal evidence, but I'm unfortunately believing it's probably true.
Yes, SAP is an expensive millstone that we've been carrying around our necks for a very long time. We would also very much like to not have issuing paychecks to our employees be a topic of public conversation, which just happened. But that is part of why we are now recommending to the Assembly in this budget, we gotta end this, so we gotta pick up everybody, make sure everybody got paid correctly, say, boy, that was a rough 2-year period. Let's hopefully cast that into the dustbin of bad memories, and in the future, this will no longer be a topic of conversation.
Has it only been 2 years? Feels like so much longer.
Well, a little bit longer, a lot longer.
Ms. LaFrance?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you for moving forward with the payroll auditors. That sounds like a really good idea. Can you say again, Mr. Falsey, for the systemic correction that was scheduled for September 24? So what is the new date?
I just sent an email while sitting here now because the last email I got was October 7th, where they said they were hoping to get it in that week, and I didn't get a confirmation of it going in or not that week, so I don't know. But we're on regular release cycles, looking around for the real SAP mavens. I don't know what's going to happen.
And then just a quick follow-up, Madam Chair. I mean, is there enough support on staff to address all these issues? I mean, I know that there was an effort to bring a lot of the expertise in-house and only contract out in certain situations to supplement the internal workforce. I mean, do you have the resources you need?
We don't have enough resources to do the auditing, which is why we're asking for
Right.
those resources in the budget. I think that we are in a place where we can get the job done with the resources we have as a general maintenance, but that has always been the tricky question: what is the right way to maximize the throughput? A lot of these changes and table buildings do have to be things that we need to learn eventually, and even bringing on new bodies might well not speed things up in the short term because there's such a learning curve to get up to speed as to what we have already done. But I'll say I am not hearing requests from the departments to add capacity other than the payroll auditors.
Thanks.
Great. Anything else anyone wants to bring up? Desiree, can you remind us what the 3 topics are for the special meeting that has just been talked about? That's probably why you guys don't know.
AFD waiver,
Yeah, sorry. I'm trying to remember what it is too.
The
MLMP proceeds and what we do with that. Start that discussion. And there's a third one.
I guess homelessness.
Homelessness.
yes.
Yeah. Yes. Good guess.
That's a 2-hour meeting,
It is, yeah, and it's going to be October 30th from 12 to 2.
at least.
Any
That's
other
right,
comments
big
before we
bucks.
let Eugene do his comments? Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, so maybe I'm channeling Eugene.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Let's see.
He and I will get friends. Often fight things we agree on. One suggestion we had is we extend the period between the introduction of an item and action to give people more time to respond. And of course, we need not do that for every half of the minor stuff on the consent agenda, and we need to have an emergency workaround. I'd like you all to think about that. I wrote a note here to Bill to ask him what would be the impact for them. And there's some things you just can't plan, they just come up to you. And I will do similarly with the clerk's office, because all the liquor license and all those things seem to have short fuses. But anyways, think about all that. And if there's a practical downside, of course we won't consider it. But if we can do that in general, it may serve the public better. And miracle of miracles, it might make Eugene feel useful because the suggestion came from him. I think it's a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Wilbur had a comment.
Just to remind you guys, tomorrow at 11, we're going to start the budget. We have 4 hours together. Basically, the presentation, we're going to start with the reconciliation pages. I'm going to give a quick overview. It'll be police, fire, streets, or maintenance and operation, parks, health. Those will be the ones right in the queue right after that. So obviously, we have 3 or 4 breaks in there.
So it's general operating tomorrow.
And if you have a capital program, so for example, street maintenance, if they have capital projects, the fire department has capital projects, we'll talk about their operating budget, we'll talk about their capital budget, then we'll go to the next department.
Will you be dressed in a suit tomorrow?
I don't know, maybe.
Maybe. Okay. Anything else? Do we have any comments from the public and audience participation? Oh, Mr. Training, did you want to go first?
Since Forrest brought it up, the question of suing SAP, you may not be able to do it. Here's why. Mayor Sullivan sent a letter agreement with the people, our first implementers. We took them off the horizon for suing them. We'd never sue them. And I'm sure SAP would use that with their lawyers to stop it happening. But Forrest is a better lawyer than I am. He'll do a good job with that. But nonetheless, the Department of Law can give you a copy of that letter that Mayor Sullivan signed. It may have sunk us on being able to go over SAP. My only question to you guys is, where are we up to now? How high is the expense on SAP, do you know?
So SAP was fully capitalized at a total cost of $82 million. 15, if I do the math right, was state grants, and 67 we borrowed for. And that 67 that now is about 38.5 million outstanding in terms of what we owe on the system. And we are recapturing that cost over the next 14 years through IGC's 12 departments, the 67.
Another question goes to Meg. Meg, how is the impact on the fire department cutting back on Station 4? Is that being shut off on some occasions, or Station 4 on Tudor still?
We don't usually entertain questions from members of the public, but if people choose to answer, go for it.
I know I'm
I'll see you
asking that,
tonight.
so I thought I'd tell you ahead of
Thanks.
time.
Tonight, I'll see you.
It's a warning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Always nice to see you. Eugene, do you have anything you'd like to say? Great.
My name is Eugene Carlhaven. I live in the Valley. I follow the public process. When the public process is not appropriate, a decision made by the governing body is more likely public interest. This is the third meeting I attended for committee meetings today. The first one was 9 o'clock, and there was no place for public comment, even though it was on the agenda. As Peterson says, we're out of time. But the meeting was sprung to the very end. The end result is it was made that the public could speak. The second one was 11 o'clock with dealing with the court issues and so forth. And I had planned to speak, but I particularly was witnessing, I'm sure there were some people in this room that did want to speak, but you made sure that you continue the meeting among yourselves, public present, that they couldn't address what was said. And then now this is the third one, and all three, the first time of three, that you said the public could speak. You didn't run out of time, although you technically did, you did do a motion of continuance. And then the last thing is the note 2 points here with respect. I got, well, I can do it, I don't know how I can do it.
It's a
Number
ceiling,
one,
not a
all
floor.
3 meetings, no agendas on the notice. The public has no clue what you were going to discuss. And when I say you, I mean 3 different committees today. The public is blind. And then this is very important thing that's happened, and it would be best you hear it straight from me, because the news will probably not. But I've attended a lot of meetings, but I thought I've seen everything in the years, and I'm not complaining among you at the Anchorage Assembly about this, but I think you should be aware of it. Last night, the school board met. They put an addendum to the contract 8 minutes before the start of the meeting, dealing with the superintendent. They remind you the current superintendent here came from there. And many of the players that did what they did were the ones that were under the current superintendent here. They're running the show. And they had a clause in there that basically says this: they're going to cut the contract down to like 1 more year left. 1 more year, even though the contract was in July. Let me just finish this with respect, because it's hot.
Yeah, you got 45 seconds.
And what happened is they had a clause in there that she took continuing, but they will waive all legal lawsuits against her in the future while she's there. I never seen anything like it. She's going to still be there as the superintendent until the 2020 term, but they're waiving that clause in there. They're putting that clause in their language, and I encourage you, I would like to read it, because I'm out of time, but language clearly says that both have agreed they're not going to sue each other. She's still going to be the superintendent for till the end of June, whatever, and then she's going to still be there as a principal in one of the schools. So this
Can you
raises a
wrap
serious
up,
question.
Eugene?
I would caution you in this, that I hope there's no contracts in Anchorage like that, because you not have employees that you can say it's okay
Eugene, you're
and
over
waive
time.
that and still be
We're going to have
employed.
to wrap up. Okay. Okay, any questions for Mr. Haberman?
I just wanted to thank you, Eugene, for helping us out with presentations by turning on and off the lights.
Yeah,
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.
He's not paid for that.
You passed it out in your presentation last week. Right after. You guys were here, but you probably just passed it out.
I know you had it.
It's just so sad.
Okay, I'll get it.
And I don't even have a digital